Well, good evening. I hope I'm not the reason I'm going to break your quick meeting record or anything.
No, please take your time.
But I do want to give you an update of where we are. We've made some enormous progress so far this spring. I commented to the superintendent earlier today that the experience that you went through in the past is obviously ever present. Everybody's sort of back in the saddle. Everyone sort of has some experience in this. This isn't new to a lot of personnel in the district, and it's not new to the community. And it seems like it's going very well because of that past experience. So we're here to report that things are moving along. We just received our NOCA, which is the Notice of Conditional Approval from the School Facilities Commission. Just to repeat, that NOCA assumes the following is in a master plan segment 1 project. We're going to replace 14 elementary schools with 13 new buildings. We're going to do minor renovations at Buckeye Woods and Darby Woods elementaries. We're going to replace Franklin Heights High School with a new high school, with the exception of keeping the auditorium, which is not a co-funded element, so it's a very good opportunity to save a good auditorium and save money. And then the plan allows for the demolition of 17 existing buildings in the district, including most of Franklin Heights High School. And so that is what's co-funded. That's what's in the program. We got a letter notifying that will go in front of the commission on July 12th, which is in a couple weeks, and it will become an actual approval, not a conditional approval at that point. And we will be in a Segment 1 CFAP program with the School Facilities Commission. You've done your part. You've done your resolution to participate. It is an absolute 50-50 split, with the exception of a small amount of LFI work in the district. A lot of that associated with the auditorium at Franklin Heights. But literally, $250 million project with half of the money coming from the state. So that is really substantial support and substantial good news for the local taxpayers. Our projects are all slated and sized. 1,112 students at a new Franklin Heights High School. We have 3 elementary prototype sizes, a 600, a 520, and a 399. We actually were 2 students. We had to go from 400s to 399s. And so every project has been slated with a size and an actual NOCA project cost, which comes from the state. These are the 2012 numbers. So they did increase a bit in size from our sort of work approaching this point. I've estimated a construction cost on the right based on cost calculators that we've used in the past. But just for information, we have all of the projects sort of slated. We know what size projects there are, and we know almost every place we're going to build, with the exception of a new site for North Franklin. So, am I saying that correctly? We don't know where that is yet.
Right.
Everything else, we're on existing sites. So, all good news. And again, I said with demolition, we're right at $250 million. They even gave us a budget for the demolition and abatement of all the existing sites. Again, you are not required to demolish or put out of use all these buildings except for the purposes of K-12 education. So if you want to keep a building for a special purpose, or if you want to keep a building for whatever it is that you might use them for now that aren't in K-12, you have that opportunity. You're not required to demolish all these buildings, but you have the opportunity to, and they are all funded in the state plan and state budget.
Mike, can you back up a slide just for a second, if you would? For folks, the difference between the OSFC NOCA and the estimated construction costs, why? I mean, there's $2 million difference there. Help me understand what the difference is.
Construction cost. That's the basic bricks and mortar cost to build the building. So if we go out to bid, we would expect a new elementary, or let's use Stiles, to be about a $13.8 million construction cost. The $15.9 is all the project cost. That's all the fees. That's all the soft costs. That's all the engineering and architectural fees. It's the construction manager fee. It's all the things that go into building the site or having the support of that project. So that's about, for everybody in the audience, about 87% of the project cost is construction. About 13% of the project cost is what we call soft costs.
Yeah. And then
that's typical.
Just to make sure we're all on the same page for the conversation about locations as well. North Franklin, we were very clear that we didn't anticipate, or it was very likely that would not return to its existing site. Because of constraints. East Franklin and Finland Elementary are a combination. We have not determined the location yet for that facility. And then the other thing that's going on is we are doing site-specific work around feasibility from construction, soil boring, variety of factors as far as traffic and others to confirm the remaining sites. But with those few exceptions, we anticipate returning things to their existing site, because I know that comes up from time to time. It seems to have in every meeting. So I just want a couple clarifications just to be clear there.
And that's pretty remarkable that your sites and your project is going to allow for that. I mean, it keeps your districts sort of distributed the way it is currently. You don't have to buy new property. You don't have to find all the unknowns that come with new property. So it's a pretty remarkable condition that you have the ability to do what you're going to do. Another kind of exciting achievement this spring is we hosted a district-wide, what we call exterior design style survey with the public. We had 85 participants, which is a pretty good sample. It sounds small, but when you talk about Nielsen ratings, it's a pretty good sample, and our results show the sample was pretty widespread. It's an opportunity to decide what the look and feel of these buildings are for the district, because as the 3,000-page school design manual goes, there's not one page on exterior design style or architectural style. So we've tried to do it with a very interesting audience response system, which most school districts use now in classrooms as an assessment tool. We just basically call them audience response cards, or clickers, a lot of people like to call them. And we give people an opportunity to respond to the kind of look and feel of different ways of having buildings look. And frankly, the most important thing for me as an architect is they see the broad spread spectrum that their neighbors and their friends come from. When you fill out a paper survey, you think you turn it in, and you imagine everybody else turned in the same survey you did, the same way you did. But when you see it live on a screen in a wide audience, you actually learn a lot about your neighbors and about your community. And it's a very instant credibility type of approach to the project. And the results, I will say, are very dramatic from community to community and very different. And they are very much community driven. And we love that, because we think the best schools represent the sort of style preferences of a community. So the results come very different. We've done 3 high schools in the past year: Edgewood, Talawanda, and Vandalia Butler, and they were all very, very different communities, and they had all very different results, even though they're very similar in size and similar in scale and similar in region of the state of Ohio. They came out very different. We use 9 styles. They're descriptive. They're not architectural. It's not a textbook course. But we use them from a very historic perspective to more of a contemporary, current perspective. And we walk them through, and we even vary off kind of the center a few times with some of the styles. I'm not going to give you the lecture here tonight. It would be about a 35-minute lecture, and I'm not going to do that to you. But I'm going to tell you, we start with things that are very much sort of where school design started in this country: simple old one-room schoolhouses, and the idea that the style you see in these buildings is not a factor of an architectural choice. They're a factor of physically how buildings function. Tall windows help for ventilation. Tall roofs help support snow loads with light roof trusses. Most of what you see in traditional architecture for schoolhouses especially are very functional and very tectonic about the science of building buildings. And we start that way because now we've become very comfortable with those kinds of looks and feels as something that's very classic and very historic. So we start there with what we call a red brick schoolhouse. We move up to what we call a traditional Ivy League campus, where the scale of buildings started to become more important to house larger and larger functions. And we've seen districts adopt that very carefully. We went to a very monumental style that would be representative of Washington, D.C., of Capitol buildings, but we see that a lot of school districts want to do that kind of flagship style of architecture for their school buildings as well. And that's an opportunity. And we get to what I call the wide middle, where we stay within the traditional material palette of schools: stone, brick, steep roofs, but we get into more contemporary detailing. And they're certainly where we are today with most school design. Larger windows, more transparency, more daylighting. Those are things that are contemporary, yet the material choices are still very traditional. And so that's a wide middle. Then we kind of veer off, talking about looking at buildings and styles that are very much not classic K-12 styles, historically red brick schoolhouses in Ohio, but they're something different. A residential style that makes a school look very much more residential than it does commercial or large-scale civic. We get into contextualism, whether there's a style that comes from different parts of the country or different communities, because there's a context there. Certainly when we did Talawanda High School in Oxford, the Miami University campus has very much invested in their brand as a style of architecture, and that school wanted to very much invest in that brand as well. It's a context that everyone who lives in Oxford is very familiar with. We toyed with here getting away from a traditional school style when we did a career center. And in fact, that career center launched several other career centers that said, we want what Southwestern has. And so when we did the addition to tolls, they very much referenced your building as an opportunity to look different from traditional educational buildings. And when we did a career center in Cincinnati Public, same thing. We want what Southwestern has. And so it's a very appropriate response to a very different kind of school. We looked at simplifying the massing of buildings. Certainly everyone asks me, is there an economic component to style? I tell them for the most part there isn't. If you can control it and you do it well and you articulate your buildings well, these all relatively cost the same. We can be careful with the massing of buildings and the structural design of buildings where we articulate them but hide the utter simplicity of them. And we always give communities a look at those kinds of buildings as an opportunity. And finally, we end with contemporary, where we say not only do these not look traditional, they very intentionally try to escape the traditional, and they try to look like a palette of materials that's never been used before. And that's certainly an opportunity in every district to be at the leading edge or the new, what's different about design and styles. So I'll show you now quickly our results. They tell me a lot, and I'll tell you what they tell me, and maybe you agree. When we looked at Redbird Schoolhouse, a very broad, in fact, all of our surveys got complete coverage in all of our categories. We say on a scale of 1 to 7, where 1 is not at all appealing and 7 is very appealing, give us your personal response to a style. And you can see every category, 1 through 7, got responses from our audience. So we had a wide range. You can see here we were kind of leaning in the positive. We were up 5 and 6 with our highest responses. Then we asked them to change their hat and take off their individual personal preference hat and tell us how they think this style fits in their community. And the change that occurred in the 2 questions as we went through all these styles was pretty remarkable and tells a very good story. This one we shifted positive. So they're saying that we have a certain personal preference, but as we think of ourselves as a community, we think the traditional look has even a stronger fit to our community. 71% positive, a pretty strong answer. Sometimes the strongest answer I'll get in a community will be around this 71% positive. We went to traditional Ivy League campus. We got a stronger response from the personal, but we got a strong shift to the negative when they thought about the community. So here's a group of people that said, we love how this looks, but we don't think it fits our community. And they did that in mass. They shifted downward in a negative shift, a very strong negative shift that tells me that they are thinking very carefully about what fits their community because it's different than their own personal opinion, which is, I think, a very good piece of information to tell us what we need to hear. At Public Monument, we had a relatively broad response personally, and a very strong shift again to the negative as a standpoint of community. So again, kind of a broad selection of people who thought this style was interesting, but very, very few thought it was an appropriate fit for this community. We got to the wide middle, and we found another strong remark. Here, personally, pretty strong response, very strong response. But community-wise, it became almost a record-breaking response in my history with this kind of survey. 90% of the people who responded to this said this is a style that fits our community. It certainly is consistent with the style of the buildings we did in the 2000 project, the intermediate schools and Central Crossing High School. It doesn't mean that we have to look like those buildings, but the kind of components in those buildings, the traditional materials and the contemporary details, were very much thought to fit this community. And so this 90% positive response to me is unprecedented in terms of a strong response from those 85 people. Is this representative of the entire community? I would say you would be surprised by how much this might match the entire community, but we're interested in doing a few more of these to find that out, especially when it comes to separating the elementary schools to the high school. We got into some of these sort of more unique styles, more eclectic styles, and the response was generally medium negative with personal and very negative with community. And so these are styles that we didn't see a strong response from. This was interesting. The broadest sort of response here got a lot of people in every category, but still shifted sort of the negative as we got to the community look. So these people very much separated their personal feelings from what they thought fit the community, which I think is a very strong response and a very good message for us. And so as I look at the answers, we are definitely looking at traditional materials and contemporary details as our style to sort of center ourselves on. And if we had to weight it from contemporary to traditional, I would say the results say to weight it toward the traditional slightly. And so I think we're going to see buildings very similar to the last time around, but we're going to be very careful and bring back our design ideas to the community for an actual weigh-in on the designs and not just weigh-in on the style itself. This isn't an answer. This isn't a very specific direction. This is a general direction that we will try to interpret given what we know from all these answers.
And as Mike hits that point, let's kind of go back full circle just from a process standpoint as we proceed through the program. The thought process is to use some focus groups, some small groups, and others to get general feelings, ideas, and thoughts, and then to use the technology in other ways and other groups to confirm whether what we create is on the right track. So what I think Mike just said to you is, now that we're going to move away from the abstract a little bit and start to put some paper to pencil and start to figure some of this out, we will ask for people to confirm, yes, we like that, and they will ask for feedback of, yes, I like that, but I wish you would do this differently. And we'll do that perhaps separately for the high school, because sometimes high schools and elementaries have a different feel. It's okay for the high school to have a little more I don't know, structured feel perhaps in an elementary,
Right.
and that's not unusual. But we'll be asking for feedback to check for understanding as we go, for lack of a better way to put that. And so I want to make sure folks are okay with that as far as being, because we would repeat that process kind of for every step we go through as we make decisions.
When you say that we're going to go back out, how are we going to do that? How are we going to communicate with people? And are we doing that for every neighborhood school to confirm styles?
Let me carry this on to its conclusion because it's a great question, and I think you're right. We're going to do site design teams for every site, and in that we will go back with these results and have a site design proposal for each site, and we will actually use the turning point response cards to get not only the look and feel of the building, but the choices on siting and the choices on how we're going to make that site a new site. So that's what's coming in the fall, right out of the gate. Would be a site design team.
And announcements on our website.
Correct.
For people just to participate.
You've kind of segued to my next slide, which we've completed what we call the district-wide building construction and system standards this spring. Went very well. Mark hosted all those here on this site. And then we went through a district-wide elementary prototype standards effort. And we had 10 to 14 to 15 staff members from around the district representing all the elementary schools show up for all those meetings. Art and music, physical education, media center, food service. Those also went very well. And again, evidence to me that you guys are familiar with how this process works and how to do it. Come this fall, we will take every individual site in the order we decide we're going to do them, and we're going to start having those site design teams. And that's the opportunity to reach back out, I think, at the elementary community level. Go to Darby-Dale and say, this is the kit of parts for this site, this is how we intend to use the site, this is the look and feel of our elementary design. Give us a response. And we will take that response in earnest to refine those designs. So that's kind of the process. So this fall, we'll be hitting the sites in order to try to address the design for each site. Our upcoming steps are on June 30th, we're supposed to receive the new 2012 design manual, which will give us the final program documents we have to fill out. We've done preliminary documents for all the schools already. We're going to be getting into what we call our sustainable design strategies. There's an event that the OSOC participates in called an eco-charrette, where we decide how we're going to take advantage of energy saving and life cycle cost analysis that makes buildings very efficient and very strategically sustainable over their life. We're going to be finishing up this summer, before school starts, this kit of parts set of documents that we're going then to adapt into what we call a site adaptation. Before we can do that, we have to do what we call our site due diligence. We understand our sites. We've seen them from the air. We understand the meets and bounds and the boundaries. We understand the traffic. But we're going to do traffic studies on key sites. We're going to do geothermal test wells. We're going to do boundary surveys to confirm everything. And we're even going to look at soil-bearing pressure. Because there's a lot we can assume about a site, but until we know that there's actually good soil on the corner of Harmon site to build a new school, we're not making any absolute conclusions yet. So this site due diligence is going on in earnest over the summer. And then coming into fall, we want to do what we call site adaptation studies, where we actually show where a new building goes on every site. And that's adapting our kit of parts and adapting our site due diligence and turning that into a site design for each site, which we will carry to the communities then for their approval. So that's kind of the process of getting through into the fall. Just to give you an example, we've looked at these sites like this from the air and from detail that we know and from where we know underground utilities are and the things we know. And we think there's a handful of sites in the district that we call multi-phase swing sites. Prairie Norton's a good example. This is a site that's large enough not only to accommodate a new elementary, it can probably do so, keep the old elementary in place for a period of time that would accommodate sites that can't do this. So this is a site where we could build a new Prairie Norton, move those kids in, then move a Prairie Lincoln student body to this site and use this school as a swing site while we replace their building in the same footprint it is currently sitting in. So this is an important site because it leads us to a conclusion, and not an absolute conclusion yet, that's why the question mark's there. It leads us to a conclusion that this would be a good Phase 1 site because not only will it support a new building, it will support a new building with its old building in place. And that gives us a key to using that building as future swing space. So Prairie Norton's one of those key sites. Harmon is another one. You can see the site space around Harmon is pretty generous. We know we have traffic issues given the busy street, but if we do our traffic study and we do our due diligence, this can also become a multi-phase swing site. And then a third one that presents itself is Monterey. Again, lots of green space behind Monterey, and even potentially access onto Hoover Road for a new frontage. And again, Monterey could support a future Monterey and then support sites that can't swing. And here's an example of that. We call these no-swing sites. Richard Avenue, there are floodplains and setbacks here that would not allow us to fit a new building on this site with the old building in place. So this building will have to move kids to a swing site, tear this building down, and build a new Richard Avenue in its place. That's an opportunity that Monterey gives us because it's a close site and it'd be a place to swing the Richard Avenue students. Then our third kind of site is kind of the middle ground, and we call them self-swing sites. J.C. Summer potentially is a self-swing site where we could build a new J.C. Summer building while the current one stays occupied. But before we could open it to new business and have parking lots and bus drives that would support it, we'd have to take down the old building. And so we'd be able to keep all the J.C. Summer students in their old building, move them into the new building, and over that last summer, recreate the new site around it. And these are self-swing sites, and so they don't need to be swung off-site, and they don't support swinging anybody else on-site. They just take care of themselves. And then obviously it goes without saying that Franklin Heights High School is exactly that. We are going to do everything we need to do for Franklin Heights on this site, why we keep Franklin Heights in business as being a high school, and ultimately convert into a new building, a renovated auditorium, and some new kind of site circulation, driveways, connecting buildings, connecting facilities, and obviously supporting our investment in our assets like our stadium and our activity center. Our last piece was looking at our project delivery process. Knowing what we're doing this summer, knowing that we would be getting to site design teams this fall, we challenged our production teams to come up with what we call a deliverable schedule. And it doesn't just look at a period of time it takes to produce these buildings and be ready for bidding. It looks at a weekly by week, day by day activity schedule. And it goes about 16 pages like this, where we understand what every single consultant, every single person on our team will be doing. And after a lot of work on this, we believe we're in a 33-week delivery cycle. That cycle is starting actually this week. We're doing our site due diligence. We're getting ready to get our new programming manual. And that will conclude late February, early March in 2013. So this is a schedule which is very loose, based on variables that I don't have control over yet. But we have completed our spring 2012 effort, which was our district-wide design teams. We are working on our programming and kit of parts for the summer. We'll be into site design teams in the fall. And after that 33-week look ahead, we'll be ready to bid our first phase of buildings in spring of 2013. And again, not knowing construction, markets, and schedules, it looks like we could occupy our buildings in late 14, 15, and 16 in 3 phases. That's a rough look at it. It's not a conservative, or it's not an absolute confirmed look at it, but it's kind of where we think this thing will play out, given what we know. And we obviously need some approval from OSFC to make that happen, but that's where we are today. Things you'll be seeing in the next quarter, there'll be an opportunity for you to approve our program of requirements and our schematic design submissions to the OSFC. You'll be seeing kits of parts that we want you to approve. And there'll be an elementary phasing strategy this fall based on confirming that we know which sites are swing space sites and which sites are not. And we'll be able to tell you the order of, we suggest that you construct these buildings in order to allow you to use your existing facilities to support this entire program. That's the presentation. I have time for any questions you would like.